because I think there's a lot of people that, even though there's resources like you, and there's a lot of people that are like fucking terrified of radios. They're like afraid of them. They're
Yeah.
like, oh, I have a bow fang, but I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. I put it on my plate carrier and, run at the range with it, but I never turned it on. Yeah.
Looks
Yeah.
good. It looks good for the gram. Everyone, thank you for tuning in to episode 4 of the ANR Design Unholstered podcast with me, Alex Costa, and today's guest, we have A Gaines on Instagram, the radio dude.
Stoked to be here. Thanks, man.
So you are a radio dork, which is cool as fuck. And everyone, we were just talking, but everyone poses their fucking radios on the gram with all their kit and stuff, their unworn kit. And they don't even have PTTs or nothing hooked up to their kit, but they have radios. And I wanted you on the podcast today to kind of break the ice for a lot of people that might have bought a Baofeng on Amazon in lieu of the SCC regulations on radios a couple of years ago. There was some rumors circulating that they were going to ban dual band radios from being purchased on open platforms like Amazon. And I think there are some legislations that are being looked at or coming down the pipe that can affect the radio community. But yeah, Alex is here to break the ice for all of you on how to get started, where to start, some suggestions on what to go with, if depending on your seriousness. And we'll talk about accessories, antennas, push to talk, comms, and how to be prepared.
Yeah, man. Let's do it. Let's jump in.
All right, take it away.
Well, just excited to be here. I'm, long-time listener, first-time caller, so excited to chat radios. I think you made a good point. There's a lot of guys who buy radios, but they stopped there. They were told they couldn't have them or they were going to be banned, so they naturally rushed out and bought them in bulk, but then never really took it to the next step. And it's for some people it's very intimidating. For others it comes very naturally. It really just depends on your background and your level of experience, but they're really not as intimidating as a lot of people think they are. And buying a radio just to put it on your kit, I understand that. I get that. Looking cool is rule number one, but there's a lot of people who are looking to do a little bit more, right? Maximize the potential of these radios and start actually using them and applying them. Not just buying a tactical blade antenna because it looks cool in their plate carrier, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. We all like cool stuff, but there's a lot of people asking questions and they don't really know where to go for resources, which is the challenge most of the time.
Yep. And we can agree, looking cool is important, especially on the internet. I have this analogy: tattoos. People can argue that tattoos mean something to them deeply, like, oh, I got this for my mom, but at the end of the day, you got it because it was fucking cool and you're going to take pictures of it. So radios are kind of that stigma right now. It's like, oh, I got a radio. I have radios. I have a bunch of Baofengs that I program myself with your guidance. I have this Yaesu FT3DR here, which is a great radio, a great Chinese radio. Yeah. So, and Alex helped me set that one up. It's a little bit more labor intensive to get it working and functioning, but the nice thing is I don't post pictures of this radio on the internet with kit. And I did get everything I needed for it, so I finally got my comm set up.
Nice.
But we'll talk about that later. Yeah. So where would someone start? Like, okay, you bought your radio, you bought it on Amazon during your panic buying of radios. Mm-hmm. And we know we have a mutual friend named Brett that bought like 400 fucking radios.
Yes.
And you programmed them all, sent them back, and then
yes.
Brett's assistant Peter paint markered them, put them into a battery charging bank, and then they haven't been used since. So for those people who haven't even programmed their radios, where do you start?
That's a great question. Brett was one of the biggest orders I ever did. I've never done that many radios back to back. He sent me literally a giant box of just hundreds of radios, kind of all floating around, and they're mixed in together. That was fun. He actually was just he sent me a DM the other day. He said he needs to get an FT3D now that you have one and I have one. He feels left behind. So I definitely he's a good, he's great in the preparedness department. I think there's a lot of people like him, right? They buy it and they want to have it tucked away, and that's fine. But taking that next step, I think, is actually using it, right? Applying it, I think, is really important. I first got into radios probably seven or more years ago. My father-in-law is a big ham radio, amateur radio guy, and he gifted me two Baofeng radios for Christmas. And I was exactly like everyone else. I turned them on and looked at them. I was like, wow, this is great. I have no idea how to get started. So they went back in the box for 6 months. I was living in Chicago at the time. There was some unrest going on and some uncertainty in the world, which is always the biggest motivator, right? For people to get inspired about being prepared and being ready for the uncertain. And that's kind of where it all started. And I went through the same hoops and challenges that most people go through when they buy their first Chinese radio, entry level radio. They're very cost effective. It's a great, it's a gateway drug, so to speak. For $35, you really can't beat this, right? It's not going to be the best quality. It's not going to last super long. The internal, like the internals are not very refined, right? But for $35, anybody can get into the hobby and just see if they like it. There's a very low barrier to entry. So I started figuring out how to program these, right? And I watched YouTube videos, messed with drivers, went through a couple of bad cables, tried Macs and PCs. Back then, it was even more difficult to get it going than it is now. Some people get really lucky and it's just plug and play, and life is great for those people. But back then, I had a dedicated PC that I bought from a dental lab just to program radios because Macs and Chirp were not getting along at that point in time. So programming is a really good skill to have. There's lots of people who learn it, and everyone should learn it. That's my recommendation. I offer a paid service to help people who get stuck, basically. And usually it's not the radio. It's always the drivers or the cable or the operating system or, something not, communicating, or some privacy settings or something that is really holding them up.
Yep.
And 90% of my time is in troubleshooting.
Yep.
It's really what it is. So that's kind of how I got started into it. And from there, the last 7 years, it's just evolved. And now I've got, bigger, better radios. I've got, antennas on my roof here at home. I've got larger mobile rigs. And I wish I had more time to be, on the air like daily, but between, guns, hunting, night vision, all this other stuff that I've got going on, I try to stay fresh and try to stay on top of my radio skills.
Yep. But at least you have the capabilities, right? So one of the things that I've been looking into is I started hunting 4 years ago now, or 3 years ago now. No, it's been 4 years. And I think not just men, but women, people are measured by their capabilities, their overall worth, what they bring to the table. And you can talk about that in a panicky preparedness sense or just an everyday outlook sense. But one thing that I always want to be is I want to be really good at shooting. I want to be really good at hunting. I want to be well versed in communications, because if the cell networks go down and you want to talk to your buddy up the street, or you're doing something, or you're hunting, or you're training, communication is absolutely paramount. And in any situation, communication is paramount, even down to your relationships. So with that being said, for me, capabilities training is what I'm focused on. I'm a good shooter. You're a good shooter. We're better with night vision now. We understand laser theory. We are getting into different aspects of shooting, not just black gun, flat range bullshit. So for me, a person is measured in their capability, what they have accomplished and what they're able to bring to the table. We're both pretty smart dudes. Engineering, can you build stuff? Can you fucking swing a hammer? You know how many dudes in their late 20s I've met that have never fucking picked up a hammer?
Yep.
So, and this is one of those things. Radios are one of those things. All these people have all this kit, and a lot of people post pictures of just fucking a tactical shirt and a combat top not being worn on the
Yeah.
ground with a plate carrier sandwiched around it and a fucking radio. And they're like, Kit. And you're just like, cool, why aren't you wearing it?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Why is it not sweaty and covered in mud and torn in certain places,
Yeah,
right?
isn't it fucked up.
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of, I call it gun culture 2.0, right? I came into guns. I bought my first rifle when I moved to Texas like 4 years ago. I didn't grow up in a house with guns. I never owned a deer rifle. I've actually never hunted deer, to be very honest with you. I've never owned a wood stock gun, but my first gun was a Glock 17 because I'd seen that in a Rainbow Six game, and I thought that was cool.
Rotate your camera back.
Oh, sorry.
See, your OCD was like, I got to straighten this out.
Like, this is not level. Yeah, but it's kind of, gun culture 2.0 has kind of, there was the FUDs and the folklore, and we've kind of left that behind. And now we're all about, why shouldn't somebody have a 10.5-inch gun with a laser on it, with no military background? That's their right as a citizen. If they enjoy that, power to them. Go and pursue that and become very proficient with that. The first, I think, major skill development focus in the gun world that I saw was really getting into medical. For a long time, it was all about, this is my battle belt, this is my helmet, whatever. And everyone was like, well, where's your tourniquet?
Right.
Where's your chest seal? Where's all this stuff that you need in your IFAK? And, we went through this big learning process of like, all right, we need to get medical, because if we can make holes, we need to plug holes. Right. It just makes sense. The second big movement, I think, was communications. And it was really inspired by what you mentioned, right? The FCC said, hey, we're going to ban these radios because people are misusing them and, broadcasting where they shouldn't be. Right. So everyone was like, well, let's buy them up. And now people are realizing, hey, I can communicate with my buddies at the range, on a hunt, just out and about, in the city. And, this is an important tool, because the first thing, to your point, that goes down in an emergency, there's a mass call event, and cell towers become completely overloaded, I should say. And we've seen this time and time again. Whenever there's an earthquake or a terrorist attack, or, Boston, the bombing was a perfect example of this. The network just becomes completely clogged and you can't get calls through. So to have some kind of backup method of communication, it makes a lot of sense. If you've got guns and medical and food storage and you're that kind of guy, like, radios is an obvious next step.
Yep. And then even down to like, oh, your buddy is following you to, a location, like, oh, hey, let's just kind of not carpool, but like, motorcade it up, convoy it up on the highway, and picking up a cell phone and making a call or shooting a text is dangerous, but you have a radio that's on and you can just, beep them over. So that's also a much safer way to communicate if you are doing like little convoys. We say convoys like it's fucking an operational thing, but we just mean like, oh, your parents are following you down a dirt road and there's no reception. Throw them a radio, keep this on. If you need to tell me to stop, here it is, even down to something so simple. I know my buddy Rick, GS Weapons, he's actually we're gonna podcast later, but Rick's awesome. But Rick, him and his dudes always have radios on them, and they fucking use them. Even between vehicles, like when Rick's riding with me and Sean's a vehicle back, they're pinging each other on the highway, just be like, hey, we're gonna pull off real quick, get gas, like, whatever. And it's super useful tool. Now, you mentioned Chirp a few times. Let's talk about Chirp real quick. What it is, who runs it, why it's important, and why the fuck it's awesome, because it's free.
That's a great question. So Chirp is, as far as I'm aware, Chirp is run by amateur radio enthusiasts, right? It's free software. It's updated by the community. It's, you might consider it freeware. There's periodic updates as new radio models are released, and, different codes are integrated into that. It's really been the go-to programming software for many, many years. There are paid options out there. A lot of them are less intuitive, honestly, don't have as many features. Chirp is not beautiful in its UX and its UI. Like, it's a little bit clunky sometimes because it is volunteer run, but it is the most robust. It is the most universal software for radios that I've ever used. I can go from programming a Chinese radio like this to a nicer Yaesu to another brand, and there's hundreds of radios that are ready to rock and roll just in that Chirp software. So Chirp is what I use just because it's intuitive. I've been using it for so many years, but sometimes Chirp, well, it's not really Chirp, it's the driver's fault, I should say. A lot of PCs, depending on your service pack or your operating system, have issues with drivers. Macs are the same. We can go into a whole discussion about cables and which one to buy, but there was a massive influx of what we would call fake cables, right? The little chip inside that converts, data into an analog signal through the Kenwood plug was counterfeit, and the drivers wouldn't work, and that was typically why people had such issues programming their radios. If you get a good cable and you know where to find drivers in a pinch, typically that's not a concern. But Chirp is what I use for all of my radios, and it's great. It's definitely something that a tool you want to have in your tool belt.
Yep. So we could talk. So Chirp is, you just go onto the Chirp website and you can download Chirp for whatever operating system you're running. You put it on your PC, and basically what it is when you do have the correct cable for programming whatever radio you have, you plug it in and you follow the order of operations that Chirp tells you to do. You select your radio model, and then in most cases you will, like, I had to download, this was weird, I had to download my Yaesu what was already on it first to kind of like open the connection. So Alex was talking about troubleshooting is probably the number one issue with radios. There's like an order of operations. Every radio has a mind of its own. One Baofeng might be on a different firmware than another one, so you might program one and then plug the next one into program, and it's completely different. So my Yaesu, you kind of explained it when we were in Texas together. There's an order of operations for the Yaesu where you gotta turn this on first and plug in this, and then once it's plugged in, while you turn it on, immediately hit receive, and then it might send. And it kind of worked that way for me. Mine was a little different, and I have Chirp on my laptop, my work laptop, and the cord, the data cable that I bought off eBay per Alex's guidelines, it's supposed to automatically update the drivers for that little USB that plugs into the system. Well, it didn't. And I was like, oh, fuck, I was trying to find the drivers. I couldn't find them locally on the machine. So I was trying to find them online. And then I have two PCs here. I have a streaming PC and a gaming PC. On my streaming PC, I run Driver Genius, which is like a third-party application that basically searches your computer and then searches online to what drivers you need updated. So I plugged in that data cable into my streaming PC, and I ran Driver Genius, and Driver Genius pulled from that cable what drivers I needed and added them to that computer. And Driver Genius is like $25 a year. So if you do a lot of PC work, it's great, because once a week I'll hit Driver Genius to run updates on both my machines to keep them current. But that's how I had to get the drivers for this. Now, this did come with good directions, but to manually add your drivers, you got to follow a procedure. And I finally got this to work, and then the send and the receive was like a little bit
timing right.
Yeah, but it was a little different than when you were doing it. It wasn't as much timing. It was different. It wasn't like the screen stayed open for me compared to when we were using your Mac in Texas and it kept like changing.
Yeah.
This one didn't really do that, but there was a couple times I had to unplug it, plug it back in, then hit it or whatever, or I had hit receive, and it wasn't like taking my contextual tap. It was funny, but it finally worked.
That's the crazy thing. Like, we were there, we've got the same model radio. I think you have slightly different firmware. I've used my Mac to program hundreds of radios. I know the cable works. I've used it on mine, but for some reason it was not communicating with your radio. We tried a different PC, suddenly it burst into life. Like, there's so many little things like that even someone who's been doing this for years and years, I honestly can't explain sometimes. I've spent a lot of time with folks. Sometimes it's simple, oh, you've got to put your Yaesu radio into clone mode, right? It's not like a Baofeng where you can just, hit go and it bursts into life.
Right.
There's been times where, you installed Chirp on a desktop, but it was really a cloud desktop and you didn't have permissions to access the drive. Like, a lot of it really is like tech troubleshooting, more so than the radio itself. But if you have purchased a good cable, FTDI is the chipset that I recommend, because it should be plug and play. It should download those drivers for you automatically, Mac or PC. 99% of the time, that's the case. The older kind of the other cables you got a couple of years ago that would come with a little CD that were free with the radio always are junk. They're always garbage.
Yeah.
They use a prolific chipset or a fake prolific chip, which is why it never works. And once you've been down this rabbit hole, you learn a lot about drivers and issues and things like that. What I tell people, just people who are not initiated or not they don't have the time to go down the rabbit hole. Like, go on Amazon, buy an FTDI cable that, if anything happens, you can return it and get a new one. It'll save you so much time and hassle and frustration. It's just not worth it, messing with the drivers endlessly, because every time you want to update your radio, you've got to reinstall the drivers, right, to make it work. And there's just a long process you have to go through. So you can see why people, get discouraged or have trouble doing it. Sometimes, it's completely out of their control. Like, they're using, Catalina on a Mac, and it just doesn't work well. It doesn't play nice with Chirp. Right. It's something they can't control. So
right. And then you get, so like Alex he mapped a file for my Yaesu, and normally you plug this into Chirp, it's connected, and you can just copy paste or drag and drop or go to that file that you sent me and just hit import or export, I forget, but so I did that and it was not responding. It would error, right? So one of the order of operations that I learned from the Baofangs is download all the data from your radio into its own file. So it's like, oh, I'm comfortable with this, I'm familiar with this. And then I just copy and pasted the list that you sent me. I just copied and pasted the whole thing onto the downloaded one and then re-uploaded it to my radio, and it worked. So order of operations, don't get frustrated like, oh, this is the way they told me to do it and it's not working. Well, you might need to turn your radio on and turn it back, turn it off and on again. Like, as simple as that. In the downloading the radio's contents onto Chirp and then copy and pasting and dropping into that and then re-uploading has been probably the most successful order of operations for me. And then you said, like, in Texas, you're like, oh yeah, you can't fuck with channel 1 on the Yaesus. Like, it will never work. You have to leave channel 1 its own entity. So again, another nuance for the Yaesus, but
just weird things that nobody tells you, right? And I went through a very frustrating process the first time. Mind you, the FT3D is not cheap, right? I think I paid $350 for mine a couple of years ago. So, using experimental software, experimental air quotes, like Chirp, you're kind of like, am I going to mess up this radio? Is it going to screw things up? And, I think that's when it pays to have someone who's done it a couple of times and, ironed out some of the kinks and figured out why channel 1 can't be messed with, for that particular, radio model. But I mean, like I said, Chirp is a great skill. I think, everybody should learn how to do it. There's just a bit of a learning curve at first, and you do need to invest some time and some study. I think that's true of radios in general, right? A lot of guys get into radios, they buy a couple of radios and they get discouraged when, they look at, a ham ticket, your amateur license as an operator. There's a test, and that's intimidating to a lot of people. And they have to learn about, ground wave propagation and all this stuff they never really wanted to learn, that you don't probably really need to know to operate on a daily basis, but is another hoop they have to jump through. So that might be something we talk about today is, amateur frequencies versus, FRS or GMRS or MERS. There's different bands out there that can suit your needs. A lot of guys are looking for, private communications, like, get on some business bands that can have encryption, or, DMR protocols. Digital radio can also offer some benefits like that as well. So, whatever you're looking for, it's kind of like guns. Do you want to be a long range shooter, putting a hole in a hole at 1,000 yards, like HF Global Contacts, talking to some guy in Poland? If that's your jam, there's a radio out there that does that. If you want to be close communications with a team and, more private, there's probably a solution, depending on your budget, that can help you accomplish that. Whatever, tickles your fancy.
Yeah. So Alex was just talking about getting your operator's license. So operators licenses are used to communicate on repeater networks. Like, this is what the FCC controls. Now, you can just pick up one of these radios. There's a bunch of FR frequencies that you can use right out the gate. You can talk to your friends locally, whatever. It's not a crime just to pick up your, one of the 450 channels, and you can just ping your buddies back and forth locally. But when you get into, so what Alex does is you can pay for his service, and he'll program the radio, and he'll give you a bunch of different channels, a bunch of different repeaters, stuff locally to your zip code. That's part of his service. And then you can let your radio run on scan, and you can pick up different repeater networks, and you can kind of listen to what's going on, but you're not legally allowed to broadcast. And that's kind of the whole point of, if you choose that you really want to get into the hobby of radios, you should get your operator's license so that you can broadcast, so you can participate on repeater networks and do it legally. You know, so that's what, there's two ways you can go. You can get programmed radio from Alex. You can only listen and then use the legal channels to communicate with your friends while traveling and whatnot. And then you can go the more serious route, get your operator's license, and start to pursue it as a hobby. And a lot of people love that, and there's cool communities involved with that. But yeah, so I'm a listener right now. Alex set this up so locally in New Hampshire, I can drive around with this in my truck scanning, and I can listen to different repeater networks. I can listen to what's going on. I have emergency channels, MERS channels, FRS channels, stuff that if I really needed to, an emergency situation, I could use those channels legally. Correct. And it's emergency is legal.
Right. Yeah. So you bring up a good point. There's always a legal disclaimer I have to share with people just so they understand the rules. We're all grown-ups. We're all responsible for ourselves and our own actions. I'm not going to police you or baby you, but I make sure that everybody understands exactly what the expectations are, right? The FCC says that if you want to transmit on amateur frequencies, you do need a license to do that, right? At least a technician class license. There's multiple levels, right, that you can test into later. I was supposed to take my general a couple of months ago and just got super busy. They're doing online testing now, which makes it a lot easier. But to your point, if there is an emergency, a life and death situation where no other means of communication are available, you can use whatever is in your power, whatever radio you have on whatever frequency is available to get help. So that's, really important in emergencies, whether it's a tornado down here in Dallas or a hurricane, what have you. Having that radio there is great. If it's life and death, use it, right? Protect yourself, save yourself, protect your family. There's a provision that, keeps you safe in doing so. What I don't recommend is, buying a radio, going to a repeater, keying up and just starting talking to people, because they're going to ask, what's your call sign? Do you have a license? There's a lot of similarities between radio rules and like the NFA, right? And we understand how just arbitrary and asinine a lot of the NFA requirements are. But for amateur radio, you can use any power outage, any wattage that you like, typically any kind of antenna, any kind of radio, because it's open to experimentation. You can build your own radio, that's fine. When you get to something like FRS or GMRS or MERS, there are requirements designed specifically for that band. FRS is like your, blister pack Walmart walkie-talkies that are about half a watt. My son has a Pikachu radio, right? That's FRS, and he doesn't need a license to use that because it's what we call type approved. The antenna is not detachable. The power output is limited specifically for that band, so you don't need a license. MERS is similar. It was previously the business band. If you buy, this is my MERS radio that I use most often at the range, because anybody can buy this for $50 and get 4 MERS channels and broadcast as much as they want. No call signs, no limitations, because the radio itself qualifies usage on that band, right? It's type approved. So there are options out there. Like I said, it's the regulations seem very arbitrary. Why can I have a detachable antenna or not a detachable antenna? Why is it this power out limit, and not another limit? It's kind of like the NFA, like stock versus a brace, arbitrary barrel lengths, all that kind of stuff. And that's really frustrating to a lot of people. But my caveat, I throw this out there, as a licensed operator in a hobby that is supposed to be self-regulating, right? Because there's not enough FCC folks to be monitoring channels at all time. Just encourage everyone to make sure you understand where you're transmitting, how far your signal could potentially go, your power output, what band you're supposed to be on, the hardware you're using. Make sure you understand what you're doing. Make sure you do it the right way, and stay out of trouble. That's my only caveat.
Yeah, it's like prank calling 911. Like, you just don't want to do it. It's not cool. There are people that are using repeater channels for actual communication purposes. They're following the law. They're doing their job. A lot of those channels that are, professional channels. And, you don't want some fucking snot-nosed 21-year-old showing up with fucking Baofeng just cluttering up a channel being a dickhead.
Exactly.
So,
and there are options, right? Like MERS is a great option because it's, there's no license fee. You buy the radio, you're good to go. You can use it as much as you want. And this is basically what I tell everyone to go to if you don't want to take a test.
Right.
The other option is GMRS, which is a $70 license. It lasts for 10 years. You get a call sign. Your immediate family members can use it. I've got a buddy actually who just set up a GMRS repeater because he had so many friends who said, hey, I want to talk to you on the radio. They saw the testing requirements for amateur license and said, it's not worth it. I'll just pay the $70 and go to GMRS.
Right.
So whatever your level of, dedication is, whatever you're willing to do, there's probably a band that can kind of suit your needs. But yeah, jumping on a radio and just transmitting and clogging up repeaters is a great way to have, the old dudes, the old fuds at the ham club get a directional antenna and maybe come find you and, figure out why you're just blasting them on the airwaves constantly and annoying the crap out of them.
Triangulate your location and report you.
It's funny to think about, some old dudes getting out of a, Suburban with their, directional antennas, but it's a hobby for them, right? My local ham club here that I'm a member of has, competitions every weekend. They will hide a beacon somewhere around the city and practice locating it, right? And it's 5 watts. It's not very high power. It's typically an ammo can with a battery, a radio, and antenna sticking out of it. And they win points based on who finds it and who hides it. And they've got, it's a game to them because they get to practice literally triangulating and finding the source of a signal. So, it's don't live your life in fear, right? Just don't be obnoxious. Understand the rules, understand where you're supposed to be, where you're not supposed to be. Don't draw attention to yourself. Be smart. Don't be an idiot. And, chances are you're going to be just fine.
Awesome. So your favorite radio that you keep showing, let's talk about that now. It's what model, where you can find it. I see that you have a Disco 32 whip on top. What's the range with that setup that you have? And that's your MERS radio. It's 4 channels.
Yeah. Yep. Great question. Let's unpack a few things. Range is, I get this question a lot, right? How far can these things transmit? It's like, well, how deep is the ocean, right? What's your environment? What city are you in? What's your elevation? What's
mountains.
the building, right? What's the building density, right? So I'm in Dallas, so I'm in the suburbs. Dallas is very flat. With a good radio like this, I can get 3 or 4 miles, even in the suburbs. I can hit a repeater, no problem. But with a cheaper radio, like a UV5R, very basic, I can get maybe 1.5 miles in the suburbs. There's a lot of factors involved, right? Like, are you transmitting at 2 watts or 5 watts or 50 watts? That's going to be a big factor. But a big thing that people neglect often is the antenna. They assume I've got one right here. This is the rubber duck antenna that comes, from the factory, and it's not very good. It's okay, but it's not great. The first thing you want to do is replace the antenna because resonance is key. If you think about an electromagnetic wave as energy, it has to resonate and become free from the antenna, right? If it doesn't resonate, it doesn't, leave the antenna, all that energy just goes back into your radio. It's called SWR, and it's going to, fry your circuits. So, upgrading your antenna can increase performance incredibly right from the get-go because the antenna is tuned to resonate at the frequency that you're operating at. So for MERS, it's only a couple of watts. It's not, anything crazy. The VMOS is what I've been using recently from Disco 32. And I've bought a lot of their, products in the past. They've also been really supportive and sent me a couple of PTTs and things as well. So they're great people. But, this weaves into my plate carrier, right? I understand and respect the fact that a lot of people want a cool blade antenna on their plate carrier that sticks up. Looking cool is rule number 1. I get it. We all like cool stuff, but I'm not a fan of those antennas, right? There's some testing I've seen that says, unless you have the 42-inch version, the super long one, basically the biggest one they make, it's the performance is not that great.
Yeah.
You're also technically supposed to unfold them to operate, and nobody's really going to do that. It's just unrealistic. So I go with a woven antenna because I'm communicating in closer range. When we're on a whether it's a deer lease, or we're out pig hunting, it's big open fields, hundreds of acres. You know, a lot of these radios are considered basically, line of sight, and elevation is key. If you're downtown and there's a lot of buildings around, you need to get to elevation. That's the only way you're going to get your signal out, or it's not going to go very far. So for what I use this for pig hunting, it's actually been, very effective. We're always within a couple of 100 yards of each other, vehicle to vehicle, right? Coordinating how to, open a gate or something at a deer lease, a couple of vehicles, or even if we're on, side by sides and quad bikes, it's been great. And there's no snag hazard. I just weave it through my plate carrier, my chest rig, whatever I'm wearing that night.
Yeah.
And it's not gonna, whip me in the face or
Yeah.
get in the way. So that's typically what I use. The vest mounted antenna system. An extended battery is good, just because, more juice, more time on the air, and then a MERS radio, so everybody can kind of jump in and not be worried about, some bored boomer who's scanning the airwaves looking for infringements to, try and, call you out on something. So
yep. And it creates that nice grid. So if you're weaving it through your molly on the back panel of your plate carrier, you're making your antenna bigger, wider. It can catch waves better, because people, let's break it down to super basics. Radio waves are waves. Like they are sinusoidal, passing through the air, and the different frequencies is the distance between peaks and valleys on a wave. So frequencies shorter, longer waves can travel longer distances, but might not be as effective on a closer range, right, than a tighter wave on a close range. So better quality, longer waves, less quality, but you can transmit farther. Shorter band is higher quality, but doesn't have the reach. So that's what radio waves are. They're fucking waves. They're like microwaves, same type of deal,
They absolutely, they have a length, right? When we talk about 2 meters and 70 centimeters, those bands reflect the length of that wave, right? And 440, is going to have, different properties as far as, penetration, trees, buildings, things like that, than 70 centimeter does, which is why in a lot of urban environments, repeaters will be on 440 versus, 140 or 144. So you can go down the rabbit hole on, electromagnetic wave properties of, radio signals. And it's great. A lot of the smartest people I've ever talked to, who study the patterns, right, of the electromagnetic wave, right, the donut around the radio, and different antenna designs that, resonate in different ways. They're like, we know about 80% of the science. The other 20% is just magic, right? Like
magic.
A J-pole antenna, right? How does that work? Well, we know pretty much how it works, but like there's a part of it that just still is just a little bit mystifying to us. It just works.
Yeah. I mean, you and I talked about this briefly in Texas with Jorge, but there are repeaters, the number of repeaters back from World War II that are bouncing between valley walls or whatever, and they still exist. Those repeaters from so long ago are actually bouncing back and forth in perpetual infinity, because it's a wave. There's nothing slowing it down, and if it keeps bouncing back and forth, it's going to keep. So there's actually places around the world where if you're running a radio, you can actually pick up communications from 50 years ago that are still broadcasting on their own divisiveness.
100%. Like there's been situations where guys are getting, with a simple 5-watt handheld, like an HT, they're making contacts simplex, radio to radio at 75 miles. Because there's literally nothing between them obstructing that signal, right? In California, where my wife's family's from, up on Mount Diablo, they have, the NOAA weather radio repeater, and you can pick that thing up easily 70 miles around because it's at the highest point in the entire area. So they can go very long distances at just 5 watts, but at the same time, I get guys DMing me, "Hey man, I'm just not picking up anything on my radio. What's going on?" I'm like, "Well, where are you operating from?" "Well, I'm sitting on my couch in my basement with a factory antenna." I'm like, "Well, of course you're not going to pick anything up. You can get outside and get elevated, go sit on your roof for a little bit and see what you can hear. And pick up some signals that way." There's crazy stuff you can do in the HF world, like when you get a really, really low frequency long wave and start bouncing signals off the ionosphere, right? And you're checking the calendar for sunspots, and because that will also obviously interfere with electromagnetic fields. and you're talking to guys in Spain. It's not something that, I've got the hardware. I have yet to jump into it, but that's a thing. You can do that. And, you could, in theory, talk to someone across the country with, only a couple of watts if you're doing it the right way.
Yeah.
If your antenna is great, if you're resonating, people assume, like, I get this message a lot on Instagram. Hey man, there's this Chinese PRC 152 clone, and it says it's 10 watts. I really want it because I want more watts. And I'm like, well, 10 watts next to your brain probably isn't, the best idea. 5 watts has been kind of the standard for handy talkies for a very long time. You can do a lot with 5 watts, a surprising, amount of capability with such small power. But it really comes down to, what is your position? What's your elevation? Do you have line of sight? What's your antenna? There's so many other factors that come into it versus, more power, more better, right? It's really not that simple. You have to be using the gain on the antenna, right? If you have a negative gain antenna, there's no point in buying a more powerful radio because that power is getting lost, right? It's not resonating. The antenna is turning it into a heat, right? And it's being lost.
Yeah.
So, like I said, for the most part, you can get a UV5R and get something like this is the one I recommend on Amazon, a Nagoya NA771. It's a very respectable, very decent whip, not very expensive, great place to go. But what I typically recommend is the Signal Stick. And this is made by the guys at hamstudy.org. If you want a great free app to go, study for your test and just support the radio community in general, they make these.
3D printed.
They are. The base is 3D printed.
Yeah.
They're awesome. And it's made, I can't remember the name of the material, but it's essentially some kind of like piano wire, metal that's very elastic.
Yeah.
So you can fold it, bend it around on itself, and it's not going to become kinked or tuned to that angle. It'll always unfold straight.
Yep.
So, it's great to keep a radio in your glove box, in your backpack, what have you. And it's a very efficient antenna. It's been tuned so that it resonates really well, and it has really, really good performance.
Yep.
So that's my typical spiel on antennas.
Yep. I have one of those for my Yaesu. Right now I'm running a Diamond.
Also a good brand.
So yeah, I'm running a Diamond whip right now. This one can't really be bent on itself, but that's okay. I fly with this too. Like, this goes on my carry-on, and I just slide this up through the molly on the side of my bag, and it just kind of takes the shape of my bag and travel with it. So it's a little bit more intrusive than the one that you're just talking about. But yeah, this is a great whip. I'm happy with this whip.
This is another one you may have seen. It's a little stubby. It's also by Nagoya. So the performance of this antenna, I should say, is okay. I would compare it to the factory like rubber duck antenna. It's no worse than that. It's also no better, but you can bend it totally around on itself, and it's not going to become damaged or anything like that. Actually, I was curious to see what was in there, so I pulled it apart. It's just a coil, right? And that's a sneaky way to lengthen an antenna without actually making it longer. You just coil it around. But I can put this in my backpack when I'm going anywhere, like even a small fanny pack or something, change out the battery so it's not quite as long, and you've got a very small, very compact radio you can use in a pinch. What's interesting to call out with HTs is your body is actually the ground plane. You're grounding this radio, right? If you want your signal to resonate really effectively, you need to ground the radio so that signal can escape. That's probably the simplest way I can explain it. And your hand actually becomes the ground plane for this radio. Holding it in your hand, you're helping the radio to transmit. If you want to improve your reception, ground it even further. Stick it on your thigh. When I'm driving in the car and I'm in a little metal Faraday cage, right, which can inhibit signals, a metal frame or a metal box, rest that thing on your thigh, and suddenly you'll be able to pick up, repeaters you couldn't pick up previously because you're making that antenna more efficient. You're helping it resonate. So just, science is great.
And there's a lot of these radios you can get magnetic antennas to stick to the outside of your car and roll your window up on them. So those exist, similar to like a satellite antenna. Yep. So yeah, antennas are super important. Disco 32 makes a lot of good antennas. So that's a great kickoff point there. Yeah, I still have yet to drive around with my Yaesu. I keep doing these little trips up north and stuff. There's a place called Fun Spot. It's a arcade museum. So we go play arcade games up there and stuff like that. I got to start running this while I'm there. It's like a practice what you preach kind of thing. Like, I know how to use my Baofangs pretty well. this is still foreign to me. I still have yet to sit down and spend the time to learn it in its entirety. You know, I know how to run scan and switch between the different channel frequencies, but yeah, I still need to really sit down and learn this radio. Now,
the coolest feature you need to learn on that radio is the band scope. I don't know if you've seen this.
No.
But it will visualize, it will show you what kind of signals are popping up, you know, between certain frequencies. So you can see it'll constantly scan, you know, a certain span of frequencies and show you what's popping up. Let me see if I can open it up here. So if you go to, I don't know, if you hit FMW to go to the menu, and then you go to the second page, there's scope. And it will start scanning and show, like it'll visualize signal strength along a band scope.
Hold on, I locked it. How do I I gotta tap that. All right. So
yep.
FM.
Typically,
FMW.
yeah, FMW, yep. And then go over to your second radio screen.
It says forward.
Yep.
Oh,
and then there's one called scope, and just hit that.
Second radio screen. The one that says forward, FWD?
Nope. So let's see. Yeah, FWD with the arrow, and then on the left-hand side, you'll see a button called scope.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's grayed out right now.
Okay, you might have to go to frequency mode. I can show you later on, but anyway, what it does is it visualizes kind of, you know, signals around you. So it'll start scanning, like, I don't know, a couple of megahertz worth of bandwidth and show you kind of what's popping up in front and behind, you know, so you can kind of visually navigate the spectrum and see what kind of signals are out there if you're curious. So yeah, it's a powerful little radio. That's why I love it. APRS is another thing as well, the packet reporting system.
Yep.
So if you're hunting, driving, hiking, you can set it up to basically send a digital beacon every mile or every 15 minutes, whatever the interval is, and it will use its GPS capabilities to send that back to a digital node that your wife or someone can look up on the internet and see your progress. It'll basically plot you out on a map.
Yep.
So there's a lot of cool features that it does for such a little size.
So yeah, and this is a digital radio compared to the more analog Baofeng.
Correct. Yeah, Wires X is the basically the protocol that Yaesu uses. I'm not 100% sold on radio over the internet kind of capabilities because it's another vulnerability, right?
Right.
I would love the time to jump into all the different digital standards for different radios, but if phones are down, chances are your internet's going to go down as well. So having very standard, tried and true analog skills with your radio, can really pay off in certain situations.
And this can do both, right?
Correct.
Correct. So yeah, that's the nice thing about having these more expensive, higher end radios. They're also touchscreen. You can also have individual volume control over your channels very simply. They're nice. It's a nice little radio. Only thing though, my battery, I feel like this battery when I first got it would hold charge forever, and now this thing will parasitic battery drain.
Really?
Yeah. So like I charged it for Texas. I've had it on for maybe 20 minutes, and I have like 2% battery left. They do make a cool battery pack for the Asus that you can put Chirp AA's in instead. I have that. But do they make any extended battery? I have not seen an extended battery for this handheld.
To be honest, I don't know if I've ever looked. I've always just, purchased backups as the standard size battery. That might be something to look into. I'm just grateful they make a push to talk that works with Yaesu. That's not a standard Kenwood plug. Because I feel like there's tons of accessories, right? You brought up Disco 32 that make a great push to talk. But, the Kenwood 2-pin is very standard. Yaesu stuff is a little bit harder to come by.
Yep.
There's a ton of Baofeng models out there right now. There's a waterproof version that has a different connector altogether. We're kind of in, I don't know, the golden age of tactical radio applications from a civilian perspective, right? There's more accessories and features and things coming out every day that make it more easy to integrate, into your plate carrier, into your chest rig, into your, your range belt, whatever that may be. So, yeah, it's a good time to be into radios. Lots of cool stuff out there.
Yep. And I'm on the Yaesu website right now. It's actually, their accessories list is cool. So on the Yaesu website, you can go to accessories tab and it'll show you the 3AA battery tray, the 1100 milliamp hour battery pack, then the bigger one, the 2200 milliamps, all the different cables, and it has all the fucking SKUs for everything. So that's cool. So if you need to look up, microphone adapter, the different PTTs, like the police style PTTs that they have.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all there. It doesn't look
Yeah.
like they have an extended one. It looks like they just have a fatter battery pack.
Right. My only word of warning would be make sure you're buying PTTs from reputable sources. There's some good guys. There's some Facebook groups, guys that make them. They're amplified for civilian radios. They're made quality. Those are great. There's a couple of companies that have popped up making them. I use a Disco 32. It's what I've used for a long time. But just make sure that you're buying, a proper amplified Nexus PTT, because there's a bunch of airsoft knockoffs out there that are just, garbage, and people want to save $20 and buy the $60, PTT versus the $80 PTT, and it doesn't work. And then they, send me DMs, how can I get this going? And it's just, it's kind of a pain. So when you're dealing with radios that are already very budget friendly, right? A $35 radio is, anybody can buy this. You can buy a couple of these and give them to your aunt, your uncle, your grandma, whoever else, and have a little network. Don't be the guy who is buying an extended battery and wants to save $3, so he buys a knockoff of an already cheap product.
Yeah.
It never ends well. It's always inferior quality.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I'm looking at right now. Like, I can get a 2600 milliamp hour Yaesu battery pack from a company called Good Q Buy for $27. And it's got 12 fucking reviews, but you can, if you go down, an original Yaesu SBR, which is the real pack, an actual Yaesu, that's $100. So, I mean, there's companies out here that aren't even listed as iFreak Tech. Like, some of them look legit.
Yeah, there was a guy on Instagram, one of those meme pages, who was like, Baofeng is the Olight of the radio world. And I was like, well, no one is, yes and no, right? There's some guy who claims his Baofeng battery like melted, but lithium ion batteries, if you buy cheap, always have that risk. But I don't know if they're quite as deadly as Olights, but no one is lying to themselves when they buy a $35 radio, right? Saying that it's the latest, the greatest, the most robust, the strongest. But what it is really good at is giving a whole lot of people who would not normally be interested in radios an opportunity just to experiment.
Yep.
Right? Just buy it. Just try it. See if you start scanning the airwaves, right? Get some repeaters programmed in, listen to a couple of nets, kind of get the feeling for how, radio communication works. When we have tornadoes, the first, here in Texas, the first thing I turn on is my radio, and I listen to the weather spotters who are out there telling us, live as it's happening, where the rotations are. And then I'm watching the news, and 5 minutes later it gets reported, right? It's a very powerful tool. Spend the $35 just to see what it's like. And then from, there you can upgrade. Then you can get a $60, $70, $80 radio. Then you can get a $200 radio. Just take it in steps. Just understand that it's bare bones, basic, minimum quality, entry level kind of technology. But you don't have to necessarily dive in, and spend hundreds of dollars right off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely. So our quality websites for like batteries, accessories, like I'm looking at Ham Radio Outlet right now. Mm-hmm. Seems legit. Like Amazon, you got to be careful about. Too much fake shit on Amazon. So I saw Batteries America seems legit. Ham Radio Outlet seems pretty fucking legit. Oh, look, they're fucking $30 cheaper.
Yep. Ham Radio Outlet actually has a number of brick and mortar stores. They've got one right here in Plano that's, only a couple of minutes away from me. They're great. They always have stuff in stock. That's where I bought my FT3D. I bought coax from them. I bought a bunch of stuff from them. The good thing to remember on Amazon is you need to see who's fulfilling it, right? BTech is the American distributor for Baofeng. Buy directly from their website. If the cable is garbage, send it back, right? Take advantage of Amazon Prime. Typically, if you buy from BTech, you are going to get an authentic, battery pack or an authentic cable, and you're generally going to have a good experience. But there are so many versions, like, firmware aside, there's UV, the listing on Chirp now is UV5X, because there's so many versions, tri-band, you name it, high power, low power of the UV5R. It's really hard to make sure you're getting one that's like a mainstream model or a reliable one that's been tried and true and tested. Another DM I get a lot is, hey, there's this bulk pack that comes with earpieces and I can get 2 radios and 2 extended batteries and, all these other little, gimmicky accessories you never actually use for, $60. And if I was buying them on my own, they'd be like $100. I'm like, well, you know, there are knockoffs, right, of Baofeng products, which
Yep.
is just it still blows my mind. It's a cheap Chinese product that has its own knockoffs. Like, I don't get it. But don't be the guy that wants to, save a couple of bucks on an already very affordable product, because it's never gonna, work out very well. You're always gonna have a poor experience down the road.
Absolutely.
It's the reason I created my Amazon list, because there were so many people buying junk cables, buying bad batteries. I don't run the Amazon store. I just made the list to steer people in the right direction. But it helps to avoid all the junk that's out there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the thing, man. It's just with batteries and shit blowing up and trash, you don't want this thing left in your car and then a battery pops on you and burns your car down.
Exactly.
So, and another thing, I just looked in the Yaesu batteries. Even the battery itself doesn't say Yaesu on it, and it's the factory battery, but the packaging says it. It says like Yaesu Limited.co or whatever. So
Did you ever do the Mars cap mod? Did you ever take out that little resistor on the back
No,
of your
not
radio?
yet. So Alex is talking about secret. There's in the back of the Yaesu, there's a little rubber dot here. You pull that out and you heat it up with a soldering iron, and then with a pair of tweezers just pull that out, and that's removing the limiter.
It basically unlocks the radio. So they will come from the factory, like you can't transmit on FRS or anything like that. It's called the Mars cap mod because it helps you to access frequencies that are designed like interstitial channels from military and civilian emergency response. And it gets you on. That's why it's called Mars cap, because that's the program. But what it does is it just unlocks the radio. So if I've had an accident somewhere pig hunting and a side-by-side rolls on top of me, I want to be able to transmit on FRS if it's going to save my life. I want
Absolutely.
that radio to work for me. I don't want that radio to limit me. So if you're confident with the soldering iron, or some pliers, get in there and make the modification. But Ham Radio Outlet actually offers it as a service. So just another recommendation I would have for people who are buying these radios.
Yeah, I just literally sent myself an email to remind me of, I even in my Gmail have a radio tab. Everything from you, anything I buy for radios, I know where I bought, to remind me where I bought it from. So yeah, it's funny. Everything's pretty fucking rad with radios. And there's a lot of things to keep in mind when you're doing like PTT and stuff. So he's out, Alex talking about hunting. Here's a pair of OpsCore amps. I have the OpsCore factory downlead cable for them. It's like $170 or $140 cable. Yeah, it's absurd. And it's like a 7-month lead time for them now.
You got the connectorized version, right?
Yes.
Of the amps. Yeah. So when I bought mine, I got the standard non-connectorized.
Oh no.
Well, no, it's on purpose, because the downlead is a U174, right? It's the really fat looking plug that's standard for all of these push to talks. Unless you're using a military radio, like sometimes I know like rotary aircraft use Half Moon Limo plug. There's a bunch of different random connectors out there if you're ever in an aircraft of any kind. But for someone like me who's on the ground hunting pigs more often than not, that U174 plug is all I'm ever going to use. So I got the standard fixed downlead. Saved a little bit of money, but just it didn't make sense to buy the other version. But those downleads, they're like $150 a pop if you want to have the ability to switch them out. So I feel your pain on that. It's not cheap.
They used to be cheaper, because I remember Weapon Outfitters was selling the downleads for like $99, and I'm like, bro, OpsCore selling them for like $149, and he's like, oh man, they must have changed the pricing on it. We didn't know. And I was like, fuck, I should have bought them, whatever.
Yeah.
So this is a Disco 32 push to talk to a Kenwood. This is for the Yaesu. This is just a Nexus U94. I've never hot mic'd before, but Disco 32 does make a little safety for hot mic, which is kind of cool.
Yep. Their button is like a very firm audible click. I like that. I've had some others in the past that were a very soft button, and it was much easier to accidentally key up and, then you're hot micing it, which is embarrassing.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. And it looks like he takes U94s and he rebuilds them. I can see RTV around it, so he probably waterproofs them by putting RTV in there. And then this one is an amplified circuit because you need amplified for these, but not all headphones need amplified, correct?
Correct. And this is another thing that people just hate trying to deal with, because whether you're, Peltors and Sordens can have very different results using the same PTT. So your standard Peltor Comtacts they're going to use a dynamic microphone typically. I don't know of any that don't. Typically it's a dynamic microphone. Same with amps, right? It's a dynamic microphone, a very standard type of, technology. Some of your Sordens are going to have an electret microphone, which means there is, or I forget whether there is a voltage or isn't a current voltage running through it at all times, but it means that it's not going to work with an amplified push to talk, right? The circuitry is just not going to cooperate together. So the very first set of ear pro I ever bought were, Sorden Supreme Pro X's, and I had to get this like really expensive conversion kit to put a microphone hanging off the side just so I could use my radios. And it was electret, it wasn't dynamic. And then I had to go find a special PTT for it to make it work. And it took me weeks to get all the parts, cooperating the way they should. So the easiest solution, Peltors is what I recommend. If you're looking for, what's interesting is Peltors used to be like the Gucci Ear Pro, and now they're like the middle of the range Ear Pro because amps are expensive. If you've got Howard Lates, like you're going to have a tough time connecting those to your radio. They just, it's like a 3.5 millimeter jack on the back, and you're going to have to figure out a microphone solution. It's going to be a bit of a pain. You're going to have to be creative, but Peltors are hands down the easiest plug and play. Hopefully you don't have a 6-pin down lead. You've got like a standard U174, get a Disco 32, get a Baofeng, it's going to work. It's all going to work together. Amps are pretty much the same way. They're just a lot more expensive, but I'm a big fan of the amps. The audio clarity, like the quality is just leaps and bounds above other, Sordens and Peltors that I've used in the past. But that's basically what you need to know to get it all connected. U174 is the plug that you should be looking for. It's most standard, most universal. If you're sending me DMs about like your weird, plugs you got because you bought like a headset from a tank operator that was Russian and you're wondering how to plug it in, like you're going to have to get your, splicing and, soldering iron game on to figure that out. That's above my pay grade, but Peltors and amps are the easiest way to go.
Yeah, and I'm sure if it's a Russian tanker one, the wire colors are different than standard. And so if you're getting into comms for your headphones, figure out whether you have an amplified headset versus an electret. You said electret? Electret.
Yeah, it's less common, but yeah, they're out
less
there.
common, but it's there. And Disco 32 is really responsive as well. So if you're looking at his PTTs and you're confused and you're not sure which one, he's great. Responds very quickly. So if you're like, I'm not sure which one to pick, he'll literally just send you the link. So, and I've done that. I'm like, I need this for an amplified fucking amp. And he's just like, here, just click the link and buy it.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Like I said, I'm not paid or anything by them. They've supported me in the past and sent me a push to talk and some other stuff, but I've also bought plenty of their gear as well. I would buy it even if they weren't sending it to me. But very responsive, very helpful. They've got a lot of really cool, just general military radio knowledge. My background is not in the military or anything like that. I'm purely from the civilian amateur radio world, and they're talking to each other more and more nowadays. Like I just picked up an old Satcom antenna by Trevec Avant, like, the old foldable ones, directional satellite antennas. And I bought it. I got a decent price on it. I was like, I have no idea like what frequencies this is going to be good for. So I hooked it up to my antenna analyzer, and it turns out that it actually is really effective and has a low SWR on GMRS frequencies. So I can plug it into, I can use my GMRS radio for that and actually kind of, use it to some degree. But there's more and more discussion, right? PRC 152s, which is like the military radio that everybody wants on their kit. They pop up on eBay every now and then for like $5,000. And I've always been curious, but not like $5,000 curious. Just because, if the encryption doesn't check out or it doesn't pass the boot up, like you've basically got a brick, right? So there's a lot of risk involved in buying those radios. Some people will buy the Chinese clone by, I think it's there's a company that clones PRC 152s basically. They're about $350. My personal opinion is it's a lot of money for a Chinese radio.
Yeah.
It does have an aluminum body and it is 10 watts. Like there's some features that maybe justify that, but for $350 you can get I don't know, some more advanced technology, in my opinion,
Yes.
that you can actually program and, you know, have some, you know, more capabilities out of. But rule number one is always look cool. So if that's what you want to run on your plate carrier, go for it.
Yeah.
Use it, get scratches on it, make it look cool, because that's the need that it's fulfilling for you, right?
Yeah. So we keep talking about 5 watt versus 10 watt. And so people understand like 4G cellular network. This is also a wavelength. 5G, everyone's like, oh, it causes cancer. Now, who knows? Who knows what it actually does? But according to 5G on a scientific level, those waves are so minute that they cannot penetrate past the first layer of human skin. So meaning it's not passing through your body. These waves are not going through your cells. They're not disrupting anything. They're not cancer causing. So from a scientific level, so people understand different networks, like a cellular network, those waves are not penetrating your body. So they should, unless you're under a fucking cell tower or under, you know, like a power station where electromagnetic waves are coming out, and those waves are passing through your body and mutating cells and potentially causing cancer.
Yeah, your body would get very warm. You would realize something was going on if you stood in front of those.
Exactly. Now you're talking about 10 watt. You said earlier, you know, I wouldn't want 10 watt next to my head. Now radio waves pass through soft medium, like they pass through us. So having something more powerful, transmitting different frequencies through your body, it is disrupting cellular material. Now, normal radio waves are so minute, they're not actually doing anything. They're so long, right, that they're not really changing anything. But
that's a great point. There's something called an RF burn, right? Even on something, let me bring up this little Baofeng right here. So that's your standard SMA male connector right there. If you turn this on and you key up and your finger is right there, it will shock you. You will feel it. It won't kill you. It probably won't feel very good, but it's a self-correcting problem. The first time you do it, you're like, okay, don't touch the connector while I'm keyed up. If you were to put an antenna on there, I doubt you would feel any kind of, negative effect. But when you start getting to some of the base stations in your home, like a large antenna up on a mast, 25 watts is going to give you a nasty burn, right? If your hand is on that antenna and you key up, you will get blisters. It'll cook your skin, because you're, taking 25 watts of energy into your body, right? Obviously 50, 100 watts, like that gets very, very dangerous very, very quickly. 10 watts, like next to your head is just, I don't know. It's not something that I'm dying to do. I don't want that touching my ears or my brain or anything like that.
Yeah.
If I'm going to use, I've got a radio, actually, let me bring it up right here. This is a radio in a go box, right? That I use, that I can bring in a field somewhere in my car. It's very lightweight. It's 25 watts. I'm not gonna, I'm typically going to run my antenna a couple of feet away from me, just so that, there's no chance that I'm going to be, taking that energy, that radio wave, into my body directly. So, it's 10 watts is not always the best way to go. More power is not always better. It can give you more capability in a bad situation. It can get your signal out further, but just, understand when and where to apply that. When you talk to the guys at Disco 32, military radios, handheld radios, for a very long time were just 5 watts, right? It was obviously, there were some concerns about security, safety, giving your position away with, signal signature and things like that. But 5 watts was perfectly fine, to get their signal out and to get, communications back to base, things like that. So it's a good point you bring up. Yeah.
Just something to keep in the back of your mind. We are messing with things that pass through your body. Don't stand. It would be like standing in front of the microwave with the door open. You don't want to fucking do that. I mean, you don't want to stand in front of the microwave anyway. But
and the reality is, whenever you step outside your house, there's waves of all kinds, of all different frequencies on all band spectrums. Think about the light spectrum, right? We can only see a very small portion of visible light. There's all kinds of rays that are completely undetectable to us. The ground is constantly emitting radiation of some level, right?
Yep.
So what you don't want is a concentrated period of radiation over a very short amount of time.
Right.
That's when you start having problems. But your router in your home, whether it's 2.5 gig or 5 gigahertz, that is a wave, that is a frequency. There's a point where, you can, this is when the FCC gets involved. When you start messing with your neighbor's Wi-Fi because you're, blasting on 5 gigahertz or something, like you've got to understand how waves interact with each other and not, obviously bleed onto other spectrums. If you want to get into something really cool using Wi-Fi for communications, there's something called a pirate box. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but basically you take, a Raspberry Pi and a small portable, home router, upload some firmware and make your own little private network, and you can get a directional antenna, and suddenly your buddies can log on to this private little network. It's all encrypted, and you can have a chat. And it's with an external battery pack, a little router, and a Raspberry Pi, you've got a very small little network you can carry with you anywhere you want. And that's not even amateur radio, right?
Yep.
That's a separate band just for Wi-Fi. That is, it's a separate beast altogether. But communications doesn't just have to be this.
You gotta be careful with Raspberry Pi though, bro. There is a website in the UK that you download your IP and you can hack networks. Like that same configuration that you're talking about is hooking up like a little Raspberry Pi or a little Wi-Fi card. You can buy these $3 Wi-Fi cards on eBay, hook up a power supply to them, get the connector from that Wi-Fi card to your cell phone. And there's a guy in the UK that you just go to his IP address that he has publicly listed on his fucking website, and it automatically backdoors into your neighbor's Wi-Fi. And you can packet load it, you can DDoS it, you can repeat it, and you can create fake networks so their phone's always trying to get on the correct network, and you can completely cut network. So where you have like your neighbor that's blasting, oh dude, I went down the rabbit hole on about that one time. Like for like $8, you can literally hack any fucking Wi-Fi with this guy's but obviously I'm sure his IP address is being tracked by the feds. So if you go to all the 3-letter agencies, so if you go to his website and you link in with your phone, to his IP address, you're essentially, pretty much committing a felony. Messing with your neighbor's Wi-Fi is very illegal. Now, granted, it is a UK website. I'm sure it's being monitored because in the UK it's not illegal. I mean, I think you can get like it's a crime, but it's not on like a federal level. In the US, you're caught with one of those little Wi-Fi cards with a battery source connected to your phone, and they can prove that you've used some sort of backdoor to tamper with Wi-Fi, but you're going to jail. Like you're actually going to jail. And there's a bunch of you can go down YouTube and look it up later. But yeah, it's similar to Raspberry Pi, and there's a bunch of different features on this dude's IP address that he has listed that you can fuck with shit. It's like, oh, my upstairs neighbors in my apartment complex always Netflix and chill and blast fucking porn at 3 o'clock in the morning, and me and my wife can't sleep. So people have done this where they just like, oh, no Wi-Fi for you. Like, no Wi-Fi for you past 2 a.m. because I need to fucking sleep. And then eventually they call their service provider and say, I keep losing Wi-Fi around 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, and they can backdoor it to you're being hacked. And then that's when the police get called and an investigation happens, and they start investigating local apartments within that Wi-Fi network, and then they will figure out who you are, and you will get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, that was my point earlier, right? Like there's not enough FCC guys to be out there monitoring everything all the time. You have to be transmitting very long, very loud, very high power for a considerable amount of time for a pattern to be recognized before they can really identify, and make a report on you. There was a guy who was so sick of people talking on their phones. I forget what city this is. Might have been Florida. It sounds like something Florida man would do. He was so sick of people driving and talking on their phone. He bought a cell jammer, right? Which is very illegal, except, for certain special agencies that, are allowed to do that. And he would turn it on his afternoon commute. Everyone around him would lose cell service. And eventually this business on the highway was like, every day at 5 p.m., our cell phones drop out. They reported the FCC. The FCC eventually picks this guy up and he gets a big fine. But you've really got to draw attention to yourself for something like that to happen.
Yeah.
What's interesting is the big shift now. Like everybody, we talked about the great medical revolution. Now the comms revolution. People get these, they figure them out, they learn what they can do. Then they move on to other interesting, covert tools. There's a guy on Instagram who I've only had brief exchanges with, via DM, but his name's SoCal Off-Grid, and he's into a lot of like really cool digital tools that they're just listening devices, right? Using Raspberry Pi to do interesting things. The Ponagotchi is one thing. It's a little small card, like you probably heard of this.
Yeah.
A small little card that listens for Wi-Fi handshakes, right? when you join a network, there's an agreement between the two devices that allows you to enter that network. And there's something called a handshake that's exchanged. It's permission to get on that network.
Right.
So what Pwnagotchi does is it just listens for the handshake, and it's scanning 12 or 13 channels, and it just silently throughout the day as you move around the office, the city, whatever else, it will just listen. Something that's already out there in the airwaves that's, somewhat public information, and it just silently records it. And eventually, you get all these little passports to people's networks around your daily route, around your daily activities. But there's really cool stuff when you get into like 5 gigahertz using Wi-Fi signals for communications, because it is totally encrypted. It is totally digital.
Right.
You can password protect it and have a private little chat network using an extended battery and an Arduino, a Raspberry Pi and a little, router hotspot.
Yep.
It's kind of the next big thing that I want to get into, at least when I have the time.
Yeah. It's like radios are already, we, like you said, like we know about 80% of antennas, the rest is magic, same goes for the digital side of things, man. It's wild. And I think, with security and with all these executive actions being passed, and, last year everyone was like, fuck no knock raids, Breonna Taylor. And now the Biden administration's pushing for no knock anytime for gun confiscation. Like, the hypocrisy of the current administration being anti one thing and turning around and just being pro everything cop, everything fed. It's kind of scary. It's kind of scary right now.
It's nuts. Like the president of the United States got banned from Twitter.
Yep. It's like
the tech oligarchy. The tech oligarchy had the guts to do that and to say, we're going to shut down the leader of the free world. Like, a lot of people got into radios when that happened, because they realized at any point they could be completely shut down.
Right.
Like, we're on Instagram a lot. At any given point, they could shut the lights off. We could be gone tomorrow. Like, everything, all the connections we've made, in the industry with good people, knowledge that's being shared could just get shut down immediately. So diversifying your communications is really, really important. Yep. If you're an Instagram only guy like I am, make sure your site's up and running, make sure your email list is active, make sure you've got Telegram and, all these other chat options going, because you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. It's fragile.
Yeah, that's one thing that we're pushing for communications, is get more people to sign up for our newsletter. We send a weekly newsletter out with updates on like what's available. But if shit ever happened with our social medias, Facebook, Instagram, what like Google Play and Apple, like, the two majors where you download your apps from, like, people also forget you can download apps from the actual website. So you don't have to go through Microsoft Store or Play Store or Apple Store. You can still get apps to your phone that aren't through those systems. So people need to remember that. Secondly, like look at the 3 major app stores that were available. They blocked all those other apps that people were claiming were conservative white supremacists. It's like, no, people just want freedom of speech and not be involved in cancel culture. And then cancel culture canceled out those apps and basically fucking got them off all the stores. So they had to start uploading their apps to their own website. So for anyone in the gun industry, you should have a solid fucking website with a solid fucking web team. You got to make sure that you work on your email list. Your email campaign list is so fucking imperative.
100%.
And you got to do it. You got to do it. Because if you were to disappear off all social medias and everyone's like, where'd they go? It's like, you still have a fucking website. That's how you buy holsters from us. That's how you buy equipment from us. You for everyone in the industry needs to start building up their alternative modes of communication.
100%. I've got, so in my professional life, I work in advertising, and I've got a couple of brands I work with that are, in the gun industry. One's an ammunition provider called True Velocity, and they've got some really amazing technology that they're coming out with. But, when we're going to market with them, we have to understand how to diversify our communications, because, well, first of all, first party data is really what you need, right? You need to be able to, connect with your customers. And I can say this as someone who works in the industry, Facebook is a gatekeeper. Right? They're going to sell your own audience back to you for a price.
Yep.
And if you can remove that middleman and have direct communications and, be the, 100% the steward of your own brand, that's really, where you need to go, because anything could happen at any point. I was talking to another guy in the industry, and this is just a third-hand story. It's not my own firsthand experience, but For a long time, Beretta, the manufacturer in Italy, was using Sitecore, Sitefinity for their website. If you're into web development and stuff, and so Salesforce started shutting them down when when the Vegas shooting happened. They didn't want to have any association with firearms, anything at all. And if you're an e-commerce brand and 50% of your sales are coming from online sources, that's your revenue that just got shut off in a heartbeat with no justification because someone decided they didn't like you. So they had to invest in their own custom platforms just so they could be safe as a firearms brand, because we've got guys like the PayPals of the world that decide, oh, you're buying and selling things we don't agree with, so we're going to hold, we're going to put a freeze on your account and you can't have your $15,000 that's in your PayPal account.
It gets jammed up.
That's huge. That's for a small business. That could be a death knell.
We abandoned PayPal about less than a year into our inception because a couple friends got fucking smashed by PayPal and 25 grand was tied up. And then it stays in limbo for 180 days before you can petition to get your money back. And a lot of times you need to hire a law firm to write a fucking letter, an official letter to PayPal legal saying, release this money. This is not your money. And it's like, oh, you violated terms. You can't steal someone's fucking money. Shopify did it to Noveski. They shut Noveski down. And they did it to a fuck ton of other companies. And it's like, oh, how do you move from a Shopify page that's only branded for Shopify to a WooCommerce or an e-commerce or BigCommerce page overnight so you don't lose revenue? It's hard. It's crippling. And that's like even down to credit card processing. Like we just switched over to a Pro 2A credit card processor and we're moving away from we use Stripe historically. Well, Stripe shut down a couple gun pages. So, there are a lot of Pro 2A out there, even down to like insurance, dude. Like my insurance company is the same one that does like Boston Red Sox and like Patriots and stuff like that because we're out of New Hampshire. But they're Pro 2A. But we had to shop around quite a bit through our broker to find an insurance company that would even support us, and then they're like, oh, well, they don't sell guns. Cool. That's fine. Like they do holsters. Oh, they're guns on the property. Cool. That's fine. As long as they're not selling guns. Like, it's worked out, but
I mean, a lot of those companies as well will say, well, you're associated with a risky industry. Our analysts and our actuaries don't like the association, blah, 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 brand image, brand health, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But the irony is for years, the progressive left said, well, if you don't like social media, go build your own Facebook or your own Twitter. And the minute Parler was launched and gaining popularity, they pulled the plug on that and said, well, actually, no, you can't build your own platform. We're not going to allow that either. So you can tell why, there's so much frustration, right? Because it really is, it's unjust. It's censorship, right? It's unjustified.
Yeah, it is. And, I don't care what walk of life you're from. Everyone should share the same freedoms. I love that shirt. It was like, I want my interracial gay neighbors to be able to adopt, own machine guns, and protect their weed crops. Like, that's what it should be. You should be allowed to do what you want. You should allow, as long as you are a good person, you should be allowed to exercise your freedoms. I don't understand why you need to get a license to get married. Like, that's me. Like, why? I love this person. Why the fuck does the government need to approve my love for somebody, right? So,
I mean, that's a good point. My argument for years has been, why is government in the marriage business at all? Why, as a religious person, I see that as a religious ceremony. Why does government need to say yay or nay? Why is the government in the train business, the transportation business, the housing business, the education business? Like, that doesn't align with my beliefs on what government should be, right? Small and limited in its size.
Because they're the mob. Like, the government just took their business model from the mafia. Like, everyone needs to give us a little, So in closing, because we got more to talk about. We could talk about more FCC stuff that's coming down the pipe for people to look forward to. But we can save that for a part 2 sometime.
Let's do it.
Anyway, Alex, A-Gains on Instagram. That's with an underscore at the end, correct?
2 underscores, yes.
2 underscores at the end. So check him out, utilize his services. He can help you out with programming, He sells programming services, and he's got pretty cool swag as well. Alex, thank you so much for being on the ANR Design Unholstered podcast, episode 4. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, it's just been an absolute pleasure to be considered one who's worthy of the podcast and be able to chat with you. If people have questions, feel free to send me a DM. My one request is that you do your homework ahead of time. I can't study it for you. I can't, I'm not going to Google things for you, but if you've got questions, feel free to hit me up.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for participating in our new podcast. So thank you so much,
Awesome.
man.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you soon.